A thick envelope. A cold whisper. "Take the money. Disappear." But the maid does something no one expects. She turns the bribe into food for strangers, in memory of the billionaire son's late wife. Hope sparks. Two lonely hearts find courage in a church kitchen and a cheap diner. Then, boom! The mother strikes back. A planted bracelet. A leaked video. The city gasps. At a glittering gala, the truth bends. But does it break? There's a hidden clip, a buried motive, and a secret grief the mother can't hide forever. When mercy meets power, who bows first, status or love? If a bribe became a blessing, what else is she hiding? And who will stand with the maid when the lies hit the lights? When the truth finally plays, will a family be destroyed? Or rebuilt right in front of everyone? Grace's footsteps echoed through the quiet halls of the Haynes mansion as she checked off her daily tasks. The crisp linen sheets, perfectly folded, filled the shelves of the upstairs closet. She made a careful note in her inventory log, her handwriting neat despite her trembling fingers. The morning mail had brought another stack of bills that now weighed heavily on her mind, each one a reminder of how thin their budget was stretched. "Mrs. Haynes," she called softly, knocking on Eleanor's door. "Time for your supplements." The door opened to reveal Eleanor's immaculate bedroom, with its designer curtains and plush carpeting. Everything in perfect order, just like Eleanor herself. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand reached for the small cup of pills. "Thank you, Grace." The words were polite, but cool, like a winter breeze through an open window. She barely made eye contact as she took the medication with a sip from her crystal water glass. In the library, Grace ran her feather duster over the leather-bound books, many of them probably unread but impressive on the shelves. Her thoughts drifted to the stack of papers waiting at home. Ruthie's cardiac rehab paperwork, with its long columns of numbers that didn't add up to anything they could afford. The overdue heating bill with its angry red stamp that seemed to shout at her every time she looked at it. Her grandmother needed those sessions, the doctor had been very clear, but the cost made Grace's stomach clench into a tight, painful knot. Through the study door she caught glimpses of Michael working at his desk, his dark head bent over spreadsheets. The afternoon light caught in his hair, highlighting strands of premature grey at his temples. She'd overheard him talking on the phone about neighborhood kitchens, his late wife Sarah's dream of feeding communities in need. The passion in his voice when he spoke about helping others made Grace smile, even as her own worries pressed down on her shoulders like invisible weights. These communities need more than handouts. She'd heard him say once. They need dignity. They need a place at the table. The words had stayed with her, warming her heart, despite the chill of her circumstances. The afternoon light was fading when Eleanor cornered her in the pantry. "A moment, Grace." Grace turned, clutching her cleaning supplies against her chest like a shield. Eleanor's expression was hard, her designer outfit pristine as always, not a wrinkle to be found on her silk blouse or tailored blazer. "I'll be direct," Eleanor said, pulling an envelope from her blazer pocket. "Take this and leave my son alone." The envelope was thick, cream-colored, expensive, like everything else associated with the Haynes family. Grace's cheeks burned hot with shame and indignation. She hadn't done anything inappropriate, had she? Just small conversations here and there, nothing more. "I've seen how you look at him," Eleanor continued, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Let's be honest, you're not our kind. This will help you. Move on." Her smile was brittle, like ice about to crack. "Find someone more suitable, someone from your own background." The words stung like slaps. Grace's fingers closed around the envelope, wanting only to end this moment, this conversation that made her feel 2 inches tall. "I should finish my tasks," she managed, her voice barely steady, though inside she was trembling with hurt. "Wise choice," Eleanor said, turning away with a satisfied nod. Her heels clicked on the marble floor as she walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume. The bus ride home was crowded, bodies pressed together in the evening rush. The envelope burned in Grace's pocket like a hot coal. She pressed against the window, watching familiar buildings slide past. The discount grocery store where she clipped coupons religiously, the second-hand shop where she bought most of her clothes, her world so different from the Haynes' mansion, with its manicured gardens and heated floors. Her apartment building's elevator was broken again, the third time this month. Grace climbed 4 flights, her legs heavy with fatigue, her mind heavier with decisions. The 2-bedroom apartment was small but tidy, walls painted in cheerful yellow to hide their age, and the cracks that spiderwebbed in the corners. Photos of happier times lined the hallway. Grace's parents before the accident, Ruthie in her younger days, church picnics, and community celebrations. "That you, honey?" Ruthie called from her recliner, where she was working on a crossword puzzle, her reading glasses perched on her nose. A blanket covered her legs against the chill they couldn't afford to chase away with proper heating. "Yes, Grandma." Grace crossed the room and kissed Ruthie's soft cheek, noticing how the older woman's breath caught slightly when she shifted position. She needed that rehab program, no question about it. "How was work today?" Ruthie asked, her eyes sharp despite her failing health. "Just fine." Grace lied, unwilling to burden her grandmother with Eleanor's cruelty. In the kitchen, Grace lined up Ruthie's pills in the plastic organizer, morning, noon, and night, a rainbow of medications they could barely afford. The utility notice glared from the counter. "Final warning," in bold letters that seemed to jump off the page. She fingered the frayed edge of her uniform sleeve. She needed a new one, but that was another expense they couldn't handle right now. Grace sat at the kitchen table, the envelope before her like a test she wasn't sure she wanted to pass. The money inside could solve so many problems. The bills, Ruthie's rehab, maybe even some new shoes to replace her worn ones with the thinning soles. But using it felt wrong, like accepting Eleanor's judgment that she was somehow lesser, someone who could be bought and dismissed. 6:30 chimed on the kitchen clock, the time when Ruthie had always taught her to pray for guidance. Grace bowed her head, fingers clasped. "Lord, give me guidance," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Show me how to use this for good, not for myself. Show me how to keep my dignity and still do what's right." The envelope sat untouched as darkness gathered outside her window, the streetlights flickering on one by one in the neighborhood. Grace wrestled with its presence and everything it represented. Help and humiliation all wrapped in expensive paper, while in the next room, Ruthie's gentle humming reminded her of what truly mattered in this world. The gentle sounds of gospel music drifted from Ruthie's room, the familiar melodies of Amazing Grace mixing with her soft snores. Grace smiled at the peaceful scene. Her grandmother settled in her favorite armchair, an open Bible resting in her lap, reading glasses slightly askew. Grace moved quietly to the kitchen table where the envelope still waited. Her fingers traced the expensive paper, as verses she'd memorized as a child echoed in her mind. Reaching for her stack of sticky notes, she chose a bright yellow one and carefully wrote, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat." Matthew 25:35. The scripture felt right, a way to transform Eleanor's attempt at a bribe into something meaningful. Grace tucked the note inside with the cash, her heart lighter with each movement. The kitchen clock showed 8:45 when she found the business card for City Harvest Food Bank. Her fingers hesitated over the phone before dialing the after-hours number. City Harvest Food Bank. This is Nora, came the warm, professional voice. Hi, Nora. This is Grace Dalton. I'm sorry to call so late. No worries, Grace. How can I help? I'd like to make an anonymous donation. Is it possible to drop something in your night deposit box? Of course. The slot is to the right of our main entrance. I'll make sure it's processed first thing tomorrow. Grace pulled on her rain jacket, the envelope secure in an inner pocket. Outside, a light drizzle painted the streets with silver, streetlights creating halos in the mist. The 15-minute walk to the food bank gave her time to think, each step confirming her decision. The red brick building that housed City Harvest stood solid and welcoming, even in the growing darkness. Grace found the deposit slot easily, pausing with her hand on the envelope. In loving memory of Hannah Haynes, she whispered as she wrote on the outside, adding, from a grateful heart, below. The envelope slid through with a soft thump. On her way home, Grace stopped at the 24-hour pharmacy. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the soft rain, but the familiar face of Joe, the night pharmacist, brought a smile. Evening, Grace. Picking up for Ms. Ruthie? Yes, the beta blockers, please. Her debit card would be stretched thin, but Ruthie's health came first. Grace tucked the prescription bag safely away from the drizzle. Back in their apartment, she hung her damp jacket and checked on Ruthie, who had migrated from the armchair to her bed. The radio still played softly, now broadcasting a quiet sermon. Grace adjusted her grandmother's blankets, careful not to wake her. In the kitchen, Grace packed tomorrow's lunch, a tuna sandwich, apple slices, and the last of the oatmeal cookies Ruthie had baked on Sunday. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar routine as her mind drifted to the envelope, now safely delivered. She hoped Hannah would have approved of how her memory would help feed others. The fridge door was already crowded with reminders, but Grace found space for 3 new notes. 8 a.m., beta blocker with breakfast. 11 a.m., call Dr. Martinez rehab schedule, and 2 p.m., water plants. Ruthie's memory wasn't what it used to be, but the sticky notes helped. 10:15 glowed on the microwave clock. Grace stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to the soft patter of rain against the windows. Despite her empty wallet, her heart felt full. She'd turned something meant to shame her into a blessing for others. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, that was enough. The night settled around the small apartment as Grace went through her bedtime routine. Her mind was at peace, even as the rain continued to fall outside, washing the city streets clean. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Michael's home office, casting long golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floor. He scrolled through his foundation's social media dashboard, eyes slightly tired from the screen's glow. His coffee sat in a ceramic mug, emblazoned with the foundation logo, grown cold and forgotten as he methodically reviewed overnight updates from their partner organizations, jotting occasional notes in his leather-bound planner. A new post from City Harvest Food Bank suddenly caught his eye. His breath caught in his throat, heart skipping a beat as he read, "Gratitude fills our hearts for a generous donation received in loving memory of Hannah Haynes. Your gift will help feed hundreds of families in our community." Feeding hope. Community love. Michael leaned closer to his screen, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose, something tugging insistently at his memory. The phrasing, "in loving memory of Hannah," mirrored exactly how he'd written it in his draft proposal for the neighborhood kitchen initiative. He'd spent weeks crafting those words, agonizing over each syllable, wanting to honor Hannah's passionate commitment to feeding people. The coincidence seemed too precise to be accidental. At the mansion across town, Grace moved through her morning routine with quiet efficiency, the soles of her sensible shoes barely making a sound on the marble floors. Sunlight spilled through the arched windows, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air as she worked. The house hummed with activity as other staff members prepared for the day, the distant vacuum cleaner, the clink of dishes from the kitchen, the occasional ring of the telephone. In the break room, Grace paused at the cork message board, its surface already cluttered with schedules and notices. She pulled a yellow sticky note from her apron pocket, smoothing it between her fingers. Her rounded handwriting flowed across the paper as she wrote, "Be kind to one another, tender-hearted." Ephesians 4:32. The capital letters curved with her signature flourish, a small detail of pride, something her fourth-grade teacher had praised years ago when most of her classmates were still struggling with basic penmanship. Back in his office, Michael clicked through to the food bank's photo gallery, examining each image with growing curiosity. There, in the corner of the image showing the donation envelope, he spotted something that made him sit up straighter, his spine tingling with recognition. A yellow sticky note, just visible at the edge of the frame, with distinctive handwriting he'd seen somewhere before, rounded letters and flowing capitals that seemed oddly familiar. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts to find Nora Patel's number. They'd worked together on several foundation initiatives over the years, and he respected her no-nonsense approach to charitable work. City Harvest Food Bank, this is Nora speaking. Her voice was crisp and professional. "Nora, it's Michael Haynes. I just saw your post about the donation made in Hannah's memory." He tried to keep his voice casual, though his mind raced with questions. "Yes, we were so touched by the gesture. The timing couldn't be more perfect. We're launching our summer meal program next week, and honestly, we were struggling to meet our budget goals." Warmth crept into her professional tone. Michael's fingers drummed a gentle rhythm on his desk, betraying his inner restlessness. "The donor requested anonymity, I assume." "That's correct. We always respect our donors' privacy preferences, as you know." Nora's voice remained warm but professional, giving nothing away despite their years of collaboration. "Of course, completely understand. Listen, I'd like to authorize matching funds from the foundation. Same amount, same designation for Hannah's memory." "That's incredibly generous, Michael. The families we serve will be so grateful for your support." The genuine appreciation in her voice was unmistakable. After ending the call, Michael walked down the long hallway towards the staff break room, his footsteps echoing slightly against the high ceilings. The message board drew his attention immediately, colorful papers fluttering slightly in the breeze from the air conditioning. That handwriting, the rounded letters, the distinctive capitals with their gentle curves. His eyes moved from the scripture verse to Grace's schedule notation below it, detailing her afternoon off. The similarity was unmistakable, like a fingerprint of personality pressed into ink. Throughout the morning, he found himself watching Grace as she moved through her duties with practiced ease. She worked with the same quiet grace as always. But now he noticed other things he'd overlooked before. How she left encouraging notes tucked into the supply baskets for the housekeeping staff. The way she remembered everyone's coffee preferences without being asked. Her gentle patience with his mother's increasingly particular requests about meal preparation and presentation. Just before 1 o'clock, Grace gathered her things to leave for her weekly afternoon off. Michael watched from his study window, partially hidden by the heavy curtains, as she walked down the long driveway towards the bus stop. Her practical shoes and sensible cloth bag speaking volumes about someone who stretched every dollar, who understood the value of resources. The pieces were falling into place in his mind. The anonymous donation, the familiar handwriting, the careful timing that coincided with her receiving her monthly wages. The city bus arrived right on schedule, its brakes squealing slightly as it pulled to the curb. As Grace climbed aboard, her movements unhurried but purposeful, Michael sat back down at his desk, Hannah's framed photo smiling at him from its usual spot beside his computer. The afternoon sunlight caught the glass, making her eyes seem especially alive. He thought about Grace's choice, taking what his mother had intended as a bribe, a silencing payment, and transforming it into something beautiful and generous. Something Hannah would have loved and applauded. The afternoon sun warmed his office as he opened his laptop with renewed determination, his fingers hovering over the keyboard for just a moment before he began typing. It was time to move forward with the neighborhood kitchen project. Grace's actions had shown him it was time to honor Hannah's memory in the way that mattered most, by feeding people who needed it most. Carl guided the black sedan smoothly through the afternoon traffic, his experienced eyes catching Grace's familiar figure at the bus stop ahead. In the back seat, Michael straightened his tie, then thought better of it, and loosened it instead. "Pull over at Eddie's, please, Carl." "Yes, sir." Carl's voice held its usual calm professionalism, but his eyes in the rearview mirror showed understanding. The diner's faded red awning provided a splash of color against the gray building. Grace had just started walking past when Michael stepped out of the car. "Grace, do you have a moment?" She turned, surprise flickering across her face. "Mr. Haynes, please, it's Michael." He gestured toward the diner. "I was hoping you might join me for a late lunch. They make excellent chicken soup here." Grace hesitated, her hand tightening on her bag strap. "I should get home to Ruthie. Just half an hour." Michael said gently. "I'd value your input on something." The diner's bell chimed as they entered. The afternoon lull meant they had their pick of booths, and Michael chose one away from the windows. The vinyl seats squeaked as they settled in. "2 chicken soups," Michael told the waitress. "And could we split a turkey club?" Grace sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. "What did you want to discuss?" "Hannah's dream," Michael said quietly. The words made Grace's fingers twist together, but he continued. "She always wanted to create a network of neighborhood kitchens, places where people could get good food and learn cooking skills." Their soup arrived, steam curling up from the bowls. Grace wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. "That's a wonderful vision," she said carefully. "I think so too." Michael stirred his soup. "But I need help making it practical. You have experience stretching resources, making good food go further." Grace's shoulders relaxed slightly. This was familiar territory. Bulk staples are key. Rice, beans, pasta, they're filling and versatile. And if you rotate volunteer captains, you build community ownership. What about special dietary needs? Diabetic-friendly options are essential. Grace's voice grew animated. "My grandmother, Ruthie, she struggles with that. Finding affordable sugar-free foods, balancing carbs." Outside, a silver sedan pulled up across the street, but neither Grace nor Michael noticed. Inside it, Eleanor Haynes leaned forward as Victor Lang raised his camera. "How is Ruthie doing?" Michael asked, breaking their sandwich in half. Grace's smile dimmed slightly. "Taking it day by day. The new medication helps, but—" She trailed off, then straightened. "We're blessed. She's strong." Michael nodded, watching as Grace carefully wrapped half her sandwich in a napkin. Taking it home for Ruthie, he realized. "You know," he said conversationally, "someone made a beautiful gesture yesterday. They donated to City Harvest Food Bank in Hannah's memory." Grace's spoon paused briefly before continuing its path to her mouth. "How thoughtful." "Yes, Hannah would have loved that. Using resources to feed people, it's exactly what she believed in." Michael met Grace's eyes. Whoever did that understood her heart perfectly. A faint blush colored Grace's cheeks, but she said nothing. Michael didn't push. "I'd like your help with the kitchen project," he said instead. "Your practical experience would be invaluable. We could meet weekly if you're willing. Paid consulting, of course." Grace blinked rapidly. That's very kind, but think about it. Michael said gently. No pressure. Just consider it? Grace nodded, gathering her things. I should get home to Ruthie. Thank you for lunch. Carl can drive you. The bus is fine, she said firmly, but with a smile. Thank you, Michael. He watched through the window as she walked to the bus stop, her back straight, her steps purposeful. Across the street, the silver sedan pulled away. Later that evening, Grace stood in her small kitchen, warming soup for Ruthie. The familiar sounds of her grandmother's gospel music drifted from the living room. She touched the diner's napkin-wrapped sandwich in her bag, thinking about Michael's offer. Smells good, baby, Ruthie called from her recliner. You eating too? Yes, Grandma. Grace smiled, pouring the soup into 2 bowls. She had learned long ago that love could multiply simple things, turning half a sandwich and reheated soup into a feast fit for sharing. Eleanor Haynes sat in the leather armchair of the Metropolitan Club's private lounge, her fingertips tracing the rim of a bone china teacup. The morning sun filtering through heavy curtains caught the diamonds on her fingers, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the polished mahogany table. Victor Lang settled into the chair across from her, his camera bag placed carefully at his feet. He looked every bit the professional photographer in his tailored blazer, but Eleanor knew better. She'd hired him for far more than his skill with a lens. The bracelet, Eleanor said, sliding an ornate jewelry box across the table. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a stunning Art Deco piece, platinum and diamonds arranged in a geometric pattern that screamed old money. It was my mother's, irreplaceable, of course. Victor picked up the box, studying the bracelet with an expert's eye. Beautiful piece, circa 1925. 23. Eleanor's lips curved in a cold smile. And about to go missing. She outlined her plan with precise detail. The linen cart would provide easy access to the service areas. A temp guard, young, eager for extra cash, would ensure the security footage showed nothing during the critical hour. The bracelet would find its way into a guest room drawer, one that Grace would clean later that day. 600 for the guard, Eleanor said, passing Victor an envelope in the men's restroom 30 minutes later. The bills were crisp, new. Make sure he understands the importance of discretion. Victor nodded, tucking the envelope into his inner pocket. And the footage? Just enough to raise questions. Eleanor checked her reflection in the mirror, adjusting a perfect curl. Nothing definitive. We want whispers, not shouting. At noon, Victor moved through the mansion with the ease of someone who belonged there. The guest room was on Grace's afternoon rotation. He'd memorized her cleaning schedule, noted how she always followed the same efficient pattern. The bracelet box slid smoothly into the drawer, invisible, but waiting. Grace arrived at 1:30, pushing her cart with its fresh linens and cleaning supplies. She moved with quiet purpose, changing pillow shams with practiced hands, wiping down the dresser's surface until it gleamed. The wastebasket was emptied, mirrors polished, but the drawers remained closed, untouched. Victor watched from his hidden spot in the adjoining room, camera ready. Through the crack in the connecting door, he caught Grace's reflection in the mirror, the gentle concentration on her face as she worked, completely unaware of the trap being set. At exactly 4 o'clock, Eleanor's voice rang out from the 3rd-floor gallery. "My bracelet! It's gone!" The security team responded immediately, their heavy footsteps echoing through the halls. Eleanor stood in the center of the commotion, one hand pressed to her chest. "I only took it off for a moment," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. "It's a family heirloom." The search was thorough and theatrical. Security guards checked every room, while Eleanor made sure the staff gathered in worried clusters, whispering among themselves. Grace stood slightly apart, her face concerned but composed as she answered questions about her cleaning routine. "Yes, I was in that wing today. No, I didn't see any jewelry. Of course I'll help look." Victor worked quietly in his temporary office, editing footage with meticulous care. A few frames here, a subtle transition there. Soon he had what looked like security footage of Grace, lingering near jewelry displays, checking drawer handles when she thought no one was watching. "Nothing conclusive," he murmured, reviewing his work. "Just suggestive." The mansion settled into an uneasy quiet as evening fell. In his darkened office, Victor connected his laptop to the network, preparing to sync the doctored files. The clock on his screen showed 9:25 p.m. Eleanor's text arrived right on schedule. "Files ready? Uploading now," he typed back. The progress bar crept forward, each percentage point another strand in the web they'd woven. At 9:30, he hit enter one final time, sending the last file into place. The bracelet itself lay safe in Eleanor's private safe, waiting for the moment it would be discovered, but that would come later. For now, the seeds of doubt had been planted, ready to bloom into something far more damaging than a simple missing piece of jewelry. The morning sun had barely cleared the city skyline when Grace's phone buzzed with a text from another housekeeper. "Check City Watch blog, now." Grace's hands trembled as she opened the site. There at the top was a grainy security photo of her walking down the mansion's guest wing hallway. The headline screamed, "Theft at Haynes Estate. Inside source reports missing family heirloom." The anonymous tip painted an ugly picture: a trusted employee, financial troubles, missing jewelry. They'd even dug up her bus schedule and Ruthie's medical bills. Grace felt sick to her stomach. By 9:30, Eleanor had called an emergency staff meeting. She stood at the front of the service kitchen, her expression a perfect mask of regret. "In light of recent developments," she said, each word precise and cutting, "some difficult decisions must be made. Often, the kindest solution is a quiet resignation." Grace opened her mouth to defend herself, but Michael's voice cut through the tension. "No decisions will be made without proper investigation." He stood in the doorway, tablet in hand, his normally gentle face set with determination. "I want to see the security logs, all of them, and the cleaning rotation records." Eleanor's composure slipped for just a moment. "Michael, darling, surely—" "Every log, Mother. Chain of custody, timestamps, everything." He turned to Grace. "Please continue your normal duties while we sort this out." In his study, Michael's fingers flew across his phone screen. "Nora, need documentation on that Hannah Haynes memorial gift. Timing crucial." The response came within minutes, a scanned image of a simple envelope, a sticky note with a Bible verse about feeding the hungry, and a timestamp from the night deposit system. 9:47 p.m. Monday. The same night, Grace had walked through the drizzle to make her anonymous donation. "Timeline doesn't fit," Michael muttered, comparing dates. The gift was made before the bracelet went missing, before anyone knew it would go missing. Social media exploded with opinions. Some called for immediate action, others defended Grace's character. Former volunteers from the food bank shared stories of her kindness. A few ugly comments about her type got quickly shouted down. Michael found Grace in the library, carefully dusting the shelves like she did every Thursday. "I want you to know," he said quietly. "I believe you. The donation timing alone." He stopped, seeing her eyes fill with tears. "I didn't take anything," she whispered. "I would never—" "I know." His voice was gentle but firm. "We'll figure this out. Just keep doing what you do best, taking care of people." That evening, Grace sat in their small apartment, holding Ruthie's hand as her grandmother dozed in her favorite chair. The TV murmured in the background, some game show they both half-watched. The phone rang, making them both jump. "Mrs. Dalton?" The warm voice belonged to Nurse Alma Reyes. "Just checking about next week's appointment. Your heart readings have been stable." "Yes, thank God," Ruthie said, squeezing Grace's hand. "My girl makes sure I take everything right on schedule." "Good, good. Blood pressure diary up to date?" "Every morning and night," Grace confirmed, glancing at the neat chart on the fridge. After the call ended, Ruthie turned to Grace with knowing eyes. "You're worried about more than my blood pressure, aren't you, sugar?" Grace tried to smile. "Just tired, Grandma." "Mm-hmm." Ruthie patted the couch beside her. "Come here. Let's pray about it." Grace knelt by her grandmother's chair, laying her head in Ruthie's lap like she used to do as a child. Ruthie's weathered hand stroked her hair as her soft voice lifted in prayer. "Lord, you know every heart and every truth. We trust you to bring light to dark places and peace to troubled spirits. Guard my baby's heart, Father. She does so much for others. Now let others stand up for her." Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks as her grandmother's words washed over her. The evening light faded outside their window, but in that moment, wrapped in prayer and love, she felt a glimmer of hope pierce through the darkness of the day. The clock on the wall ticked softly, showing 8:30. Ruthie's prayers continued, a gentle stream of faith and comfort that seemed to fill their small apartment with peace. Grace kept her eyes closed, letting her grandmother's words carry her fears up to heaven, trusting that somehow, some way, the truth would come to light. Friday morning dawned with a crisp determination in the air. Michael stood in his office, straightening papers on his desk with purpose. When Grace arrived for her usual duties, he asked her to join him. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. "I have a proposal for you." Grace perched carefully on the edge of the seat, her hands folded in her lap. "Yes, Mr. Haynes. While the internal review is ongoing, I'd like to offer you a temporary position." He slid a folder across the desk. "The Haynes Foundation is launching a city kitchen pilot program. We need someone with practical experience to coordinate it." Grace opened the folder, her eyes widening as she read. "This is a full-time role, completely separate from the household staff. You'd work directly with the foundation and City Harvest Food Bank." Michael's voice was warm but professional. "The salary and benefits are outlined on page 3. Grace's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the pages. The amount listed was more than she'd ever made. "This is very generous, but with everything that's happened, that's exactly why we need someone like you," Michael said firmly. "Someone who understands both food service operations and genuine community needs." An hour later, Grace sat in Human Resources, signing paperwork with Sharon Chen, the Foundation's HR director. "Everything's properly documented," Sharon assured her, adding each signed form to a growing file. "This is a legitimate position with clear deliverables." Down the hall, Eleanor's voice carried through her closed office door. "This is absolutely unacceptable. How dare he?" The rest was muffled, but the tone was unmistakable. Early afternoon, Grace walked through City Harvest's warehouse with Nora Patel. The food bank director pointed out massive shelving units stacked with canned goods and dry staples. "Storage is always our biggest challenge," Nora explained, gesturing to the ceiling-high racks. "We need to maximize space while keeping everything accessible and properly rotated." Grace nodded, already taking mental notes. "What about temperature control for fresh produce?" "Walk-in coolers are here." Nora led the way to a massive refrigerated section. "But fresh goods are trickiest. Short shelf life, special handling requirements." They settled in Nora's office, where Grace pulled out a notebook. I've been thinking about standardized pantry kits, she said, uncapping her pen. Basic staples that can make multiple meals. Go on, Nora encouraged, leaning forward with interest. Grace began sketching out lists. Rice, dried beans, lentils, protein-rich foods that store well, low-sodium seasoning blends for flavor without health concerns. Her pen moved quickly across the paper. We could include simple recipe cards, 20 minutes or less, with diabetic-friendly substitutions. Cost per kit? Nora asked practically. Grace ran calculations, considering bulk purchasing power. If we buy in volume and use volunteer assembly teams, she wrote out the numbers. We could keep it under $15 per kit, each one providing the base for 6 to 8 meals. Nora smiled. The Haynes Foundation seed funding could launch a solid pilot program with those numbers. In his office, Michael reviewed Grace's proposal. This is exactly what Hannah envisioned, he said quietly. Practical help that preserves dignity. He signed the funding authorization with a steady hand. Eleanor burst in without knocking. You can't seriously be moving forward with this ridiculous project while that woman is under investigation. Michael looked up calmly. The Foundation's charitable work will continue, Mother. We can hardly oppose feeding hungry families, can we? Eleanor's mouth tightened. Of course not, but... Then we have nothing to discuss. Michael's tone was final. The board has approved the pilot program. Back at City Harvest, Grace sat at a borrowed desk, finalizing details for tomorrow's volunteer orientation. The printer hummed, producing neat stacks of schedules, task lists, and safety protocols. You've thought of everything, Nora commented, reviewing the papers. Even allergies and lifting restrictions? Grace checked her watch. 5:30. I should head home soon. Grandma will be waiting. Of course. Nora helped her gather the printed materials. But Grace, what you're doing here, it matters. Don't let anyone tell you different. Grace tucked the schedules into her bag, thinking of all the families who would receive help. Whatever else was happening, this work was worth doing. She thought of Hannah's dream of neighborhood kitchens and how sometimes light could shine through the darkest situations. See you tomorrow, she said to Nora, heading for the door. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the warehouse floor. Somewhere in those shadows, Eleanor's accusations still lurked, but here in this space, surrounded by shelves of food meant for sharing, Grace felt her shoulders straighten with purpose. The printer produced its final sheet, tomorrow's orientation schedule. Grace added it to her bag, ready to face whatever the next day might bring. She had work to do and people to help. That was enough for now. The morning sun streamed through the high windows of Maple Street Church Hall, casting warm light across the well-worn linoleum floor. Grace stood at the front, clipboard in hand, facing 30 eager volunteers. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice clear and steady. Today we're starting something special, making sure no one in our community goes hungry. She divided them into teams, prep stations, assembly lines, and delivery coordination. Remember, we're not just handing out food, we're sharing hope. At the biscuit station, she noticed an older man struggling with the measuring cups. His name tag read Frank, and his Vietnam veteran cap was worn with pride. Need a hand? Grace asked gently. Frank's weathered face creased. My Martha, she made the best biscuits. Been trying to recreate them since she passed last spring. His hands trembled slightly over the flour bag. Here, Grace said, pulling up a stool. Let me show you Martha's secret. She hadn't known Martha, but she knew biscuits, the way her own grandmother had taught her. First, we chill the butter. She demonstrated each step. Then we sift the flour, See how it gets lighter. That's the magic starting. Frank watched intently, taking notes on a small pad. 2 cups flour, 1 tablespoon baking powder. Grace continued. A pinch of salt. Martha probably knew exactly how much by feel, right? Frank nodded, a small smile forming. She never measured anything, just knew. Cut in the cold butter until it looks like little peas. Grace demonstrated. Then the buttermilk, but don't overwork it. That's what keeps them tender. Across the kitchen, Michael worked steadily at the vegetable prep station, dicing onions with careful precision. His eyes watered from the task, but he kept at it without complaint. Every so often, his gaze would drift to Grace, noting how naturally she moved between groups, encouraging and instructing. A local news crew arrived, setting up their equipment with minimal disruption. The reporter, Lisa Chen, interviewed several volunteers while her cameraman captured footage of the bustling activity. This is such an inspiring initiative, Lisa said to Grace. How did it come together? Grace deflected attention to the larger mission. It's about neighbors helping neighbors. The Haynes Foundation provided the means, but these volunteers are the real story. The camera panned across the hall, catching Frank proudly pulling his first batch of perfect biscuits from the oven. Just like Martha's, he whispered, touching his wedding ring. Throughout the morning, the Foundation's donation page kept pinging with new contributions. Michael checked his phone occasionally, sharing quiet smiles with Grace at each update. After the last delivery vehicle pulled away and the hall was spotless again, Grace and Michael sat at a corner table with coffee and laptops. Spreadsheets filled their screens, delivery routes, inventory tracking, volunteer schedules. If we adjust this route, Grace pointed, her finger tracing the map, we could reach 10 more families without adding another driver. Michael leaned in to see better, their shoulders almost touching. That's brilliant, and look at the fuel savings. They worked companionably, the afternoon light softening to evening. Sometimes their laughter would break the quiet, over a typing mistake, a silly street name, the way they both reached for their coffee cups at the same time. When Grace solved a particularly tricky scheduling problem, Michael's hand found hers on the table. Just a warm squeeze, brief but full of unspoken appreciation. Their eyes met, then returned to their work, both smiling softly. Across town, Eleanor Haynes sat in her study, watching Lisa Chen's news segment with growing frustration. The camera showed Grace teaching Frank, Michael chopping vegetables, volunteers packing boxes with care. Look at this outpouring of support, Lisa's voiceover announced. The Haynes Foundation's City Kitchen pilot program is already exceeding expectations. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her phone. She pressed Victor's number. Have you seen this? She demanded when he answered. I'm handling it. Victor replied smoothly. Handle it faster. Eleanor snapped. The gala is our deadline. I want this finished before then. She ended the call with a sharp tap. Back at the church hall, Grace gathered her things. Her phone showed 9:30. Time to head home to Ruthie. Thank you, Michael said quietly as she pulled on her jacket. For everything today. Thank you for trusting me with this, she replied. They shared one more smile before Grace stepped out into the cool evening air. She pulled out her phone to text Ruthie. On my way home in 15 minutes, Grandma. Made some biscuits. Saved you one. The stars were just beginning to appear as she walked to the bus stop, carrying the warm satisfaction of a day well spent. The small church bell chimed as Grace and Ruthie made their way up the worn steps of Hope Community Chapel. The morning sun filtered through stained glass, casting warm patches of color across the wooden pews, blues and golds dancing over the polished oak. Ruthie's hand rested lightly on Grace's arm for balance as they found their usual spot in the third row, the familiar cushions sinking comfortably beneath them. Several congregation members nodded warm greetings as they settled in. "Good morning, Grace. Ruthie, you're looking well today," whispered Mrs. Henderson from the row behind, her weathered hands reaching forward to pat Ruthie's shoulder. Pastor Joel Avery stood at the entrance, greeting each person with a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. His salt and pepper hair caught the light as he made his way to the pulpit, his weathered Bible, pages dog-eared and marked with colorful tabs, held reverently in his calloused hands. He adjusted his simple glasses and surveyed the congregation with genuine affection. "Today," he began, his voice warm and steady like a comforting blanket, "we're going to talk about something that might feel hard. We're going to pray for those who challenge us, the enemies we don't yet understand, those people who make our hearts tighten when we see them coming." Ruthie squeezed Grace's hand, her papery skin soft against Grace's. They both knew who was on Grace's mind. Eleanor's face flickered across her thoughts. "Sometimes," Pastor Joel continued, leaning slightly forward over the pulpit, "the person who seems set against us is carrying burdens we can't see, pain we don't know about, fear that makes them act in ways that hurt others. Behind every harsh word, there's often a wounded heart." A shaft of sunlight illuminated the dust motes floating in the air as the congregation sat in thoughtful silence. Grace thought of Eleanor's face in the pantry that day, the tightness around her eyes when she'd offered the envelope, the perfectly controlled posture that never quite relaxed. Was there fear behind that carefully maintained facade? What wounds might Eleanor be hiding beneath her designer clothes and practiced smile? The choir sang softly, their harmonies blending with the gentle whir of the ceiling fans above. Grace closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her troubled thoughts. After the short service, several church members stopped to chat with Ruthie, asking about her health and offering to bring over meals. Grace smiled, watching her grandmother's face light up with each conversation, the years seeming to melt away as she laughed with her friends. "Your grandmother is a treasure," said Pastor Joel, stepping beside Grace. "And so are you, Grace. The work you're doing matters." Grace nodded gratefully, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. "Thank you. Sometimes it feels like pushing a boulder uphill." "The best work often does," he replied with a knowing smile. At 1:00, Grace met Michael at the foundation office. The autumn sunlight streamed through large windows, painting golden rectangles on the polished hardwood floor as they reviewed the gala program for Thursday, October 12th. A vase of orange and yellow mums brightened the conference table, where papers were spread out in neat piles. "We should acknowledge the anonymous gift," Michael said, tapping his pen against the paper, his expression thoughtful. "It sparked everything else. Like throwing a pebble in a pond, the ripples keep going." Grace shifted in her chair, smoothing her simple skirt. "I've been thinking about that. If the focus stays on feeding our neighbors, I wouldn't mind being named. Maybe my story could help somehow." Michael's eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise crossing his features. "Are you sure? There's no pressure. Your privacy matters too." "I'm sure." Grace smiled, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and peace settle in her chest. It might help others see that every gift matters, no matter how it starts, even unexpected ones. They worked through the details, the timing, the wording, how to frame it as a catalyst for community action rather than personal recognition. Michael's assistant brought them coffee in simple white mugs as they fine-tuned the presentation slides, the rich aroma filling the room. "Something tells me this gala is going to be more meaningful than anyone expects," Michael said, his voice soft with admiration. as he glanced at Grace. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor sat in the private room of Le Petit Café, her tablet propped against a crystal water glass. The exclusive restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the delicate clink of expensive silverware. Board member Catherine Wells leaned close, her pearl earrings catching the light as she whispered the morning's development. "They're planning to reveal the donor at the gala," Catherine said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "Apparently it's that housekeeper of yours, the pretty one with the grandmother." Eleanor's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the crisp white tablecloth, her expression betraying nothing while her mind raced. She reached for her phone, excusing herself, and stepping away from the table into a quiet alcove decorated with tasteful artwork. "Victor, move up the timeline. I want that security footage ready for Thursday night." Her voice was low, controlled, with an edge of steel beneath the velvet. "Make sure it looks like she was specifically searching for jewelry access. Yes, during the gala. Maximum impact. This needs to be handled. Definitively." Eleanor ended the call and stood motionless for a moment, staring at a painting of peaceful countryside that couldn't have been further from the storm brewing inside her. Back at Grace's apartment that evening, the comforting smell of beef stew and fresh cornbread filled the small kitchen. Steam fogged the windows as pots bubbled on the stove. Ruthie sat at their small table, arranging napkins while Grace stirred the pot, adding a pinch more of her secret blend of herbs. "Pastor Joel's words stuck with me today," Ruthie said, smoothing a wrinkle from the tablecloth with hands that had seen decades of honest work. "About praying for those we don't understand. Got me thinking about Mrs. Blackwell." Grace ladled the thick stew into bowls, chunks of tender beef and vegetables swimming in rich gravy. "Me too, Grandma. It's not always easy, but it feels right. Sometimes I wonder what makes her so defensive. The Lord works in mysterious ways," Ruthie said, breaking open a warm piece of cornbread, steam rising as golden butter melted into the crevices. "Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the biggest blessings. Remember how your mama used to say trouble and miracle often travel together?" They ate together in comfortable quiet, the evening light soft through their kitchen window, bathing the modest room in amber glow. Grace watched her grandmother savor each bite, thankful for these simple moments of peace. The quiet click of spoons against bowls, the gentle hum of their refrigerator, the familiar creaks of their building settling for the night. A text from Michael lit up Grace's phone. "Program draft finished. Printing tomorrow. Thank you for your courage." Grace smiled, tucking the phone away. The week ahead would bring whatever it would bring. For now there was stew and cornbread, and her grandmother's gentle presence, and the memory of Pastor Joel's words about understanding those who seemed to stand against them. Perhaps even Eleanor Blackwell had her reasons. Outside, the street lamps flickered on one by one as evening settled over the city, stars appearing faintly above the urban glow. In the distance, church bells chimed 7 o'clock, their sound carrying on the cool autumn air, mingling with the evening sounds of children being called home for dinner and car doors closing as neighbors returned from work. Another day done, with the gala drawing ever closer. The community center kitchen buzzed with energy as Grace arranged 3 stacks of materials on the stainless steel prep table. She'd arrived early to set up for the volunteer captain training, making sure everything was perfectly organized. "Welcome, everyone," Grace said warmly as her chosen captains filed in. There was Sarah Chen from the local high school's cooking club, retired firefighter Marcus Williams, and Rosa Martinez, who ran the corner grocery. "First things first," Grace began, passing out thick binders. "These contain everything you'll need: food safety guidelines, temperature logs, and allergy protocols." She demonstrated proper hand-washing technique at the industrial sink, her movements precise. Remember, we're dealing with food that goes to families. Every safety step matters. Marcus raised his hand. What about equipment checks? Grace smiled, pulling out a laminated checklist. Great question. We'll do equipment inspections before and after each shift. She walked them through the commercial refrigerator's temperature log, showing them where to record the numbers. At the prep station, Rosa practiced reading the digital thermometer, while Sarah sorted recipe cards into seasonal categories. Grace watched them work, offering gentle corrections when needed. These recipe cards need to last, Grace explained, carefully feeding them through the laminator one by one. The warm, plastic sheets sealed around each card, protecting the clear instructions and bright photos. We want them to survive spills and repeated use. Across town, Michael sat in his office, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, I'd like to arrange a car service for Thursday evening. He glanced at his calendar, where Gala was marked in bold letters. The pickup would be at 425 Maple Street, apartment 3B. It needs to be a vehicle that's easy to get in and out of. It's for an elderly lady with some mobility concerns. He listened, making notes. Perfect. Yes, temperature control is important. And could we have the same driver for pickup and return? Someone patient and experienced with seniors would be ideal. Back at the community center, Grace demonstrated proper food storage rotation. First in, first out, she explained, moving cans on the metal shelving. Date everything clearly. If you're not sure, ask. Sarah examined the laminated allergen chart Grace had created. This is really thorough, she said, studying the color-coded sections. Some of our families have serious allergies, Grace explained. We need to be absolutely certain about ingredients and cross-contamination. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat in the Foundation's conference room, stirring honey into her tea with measured movements. Across from her, board member James Patterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I'm simply concerned about proper procedures, Eleanor said smoothly. Hiring someone without formal qualifications for such a visible position. She let the words hang. James adjusted his tie. The preliminary results are impressive, Eleanor. The volunteer engagement alone has exceeded projections. But surely you see the risk to our reputation? Eleanor pressed, her voice honeyed with false concern. Actually, James replied, gathering his papers, I see more risk in disrupting a successful program. The community response has been overwhelmingly positive. He stood, effectively ending the conversation. Eleanor's smile remained fixed as she watched him leave, her teacup clicking perhaps too sharply against its saucer. The day stretched into evening. In the mansion's underground garage, Carl Benton worked methodically under the hood of his sedan, checking fluid levels by the light of his LED work lamp. The concrete walls amplified the soft sounds of his movements. He liked these quiet moments after hours, when the garage was empty except for the row of luxury vehicles in their assigned spots. Working on cars helped him think, and lately there had been much to think about. As he moved to check the tire pressure, something caught his eye, a tiny flash of black plastic near Eleanor's parking space. Carl knelt down, picking up what turned out to be a micro SD card. He turned it over in his gloved hands, noting there was no identifying mark. The location was interesting, right where Victor Lang usually parked when he visited. Carl had noticed the man's increased presence lately. Always with his camera gear. Rather than turn it into lost and found, where things had a way of disappearing, Carl slipped the card into his pocket. He'd check what was on it first, just to make sure it got back to its rightful owner, he told himself. Back at the community center, Grace watched her volunteer captains practice the closing procedures. Marcus double-checked the equipment shutdown list, while Rosa and Sarah cleaned and sanitized the prep surfaces. Remember, Grace said, if anything seems off, equipment problems, temperature issues, anything. Call me immediately. Don't wait." They nodded, understanding the responsibility they were taking on. Grace felt a surge of pride watching them work. These were good people, committed to serving their community. "You're all doing great," she encouraged, helping them pack up their materials. "We'll do another practice run tomorrow, then you'll each shadow a shift before leading one." The night air was cool as they left the building, their breath visible in small clouds. Grace locked up, double-checking each door as she'd been trained. In the garage, Carl finished his maintenance routine, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He opened his glove box and carefully placed the micro SD card inside, closing it with a soft click. The garage lights hummed overhead as he gathered his tools, his movements unhurried but purposeful. Every detail mattered in this job. The things you noticed, the things you kept track of. Sometimes the smallest things turned out to be the most important. As he prepared to leave, Carl glanced once more at Eleanor's empty parking spot, then at his glove box. The card might be nothing, or it might be something. Either way, he'd find out soon enough. The clock on his dashboard read 10:30 p.m. as he closed the car door. Another day done, but tomorrow would bring its own revelations. The community center buzzed with energy as people shared their kitchen pilot stories. The large room hummed with excited voices and delicious aromas wafting from various cooking stations. Colorful handmade posters decorated the walls, showcasing before and after meal photos and testimonials in children's handwriting. Sarah Martinez, a single mother of 3 with dark circles under her determined eyes, demonstrated the quick beef and vegetable stew she'd mastered from Grace's recipe cards. "My kids actually ask for seconds now," Sarah said, stirring the pot while others crowded around her station, nodding and taking notes. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with her free hand. 20 minutes start to finish, and I can help with homework while it simmers. Before this program, we were eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week." Grace made detailed notes in her worn spiral notebook as Sarah explained her clever substitutions. Frozen vegetables, when fresh, were too expensive. Better seasoning combinations she'd discovered. Sarah's confident smile was a far cry from the hesitant woman who'd first walked through their doors 8 weeks ago. This was exactly the kind of practical knowledge that could help other families struggling with tight budgets and even tighter schedules. "And the leftovers make perfect school lunches," Sarah added, ladling samples into small cups for everyone to taste. At the prep station across the room, retired machinist Bob Wheeler carefully unpacked a set of professional-grade knives, each one gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His weathered hands moved with surprising gentleness as he arranged them in size order on a clean cloth. "These were just collecting dust in my garage," he said, laying them out with precision that spoke to his years of working with tools. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he stepped back to admire the display. "Better they get used here than sit in a drawer. My wife always said good tools make the job easier, and she was right about that, like most things." Grace touched the well-maintained wooden handles with appreciation, noticing how the blades had been expertly sharpened. "These will make such a difference, Mr. Wheeler. Thank you. Our volunteers have been struggling with those dull department store sets." In the small office she shared with the volunteer coordinators, Grace worked on editing the thank you video, squinting at her computer screen. The walls around her were plastered with sign-up sheets, weekly menus, and children's crayon drawings of happy families at dinner tables. She kept the video simple: smiling faces, steaming pots, filled plates. No dramatic music, no manipulative shots of empty fridges. Just dignity and gratitude, framing each scene with natural light and honest moments. "How's this?" she asked Michael, who had stopped by to review the final cut. The familiar scent of his aftershave mingled with the coffee brewing in the corner. They watched the 90 seconds together, shoulders almost touching as they leaned toward the screen. Volunteers spoke naturally about what the program meant to them. A grandmother with arthritic hands described teaching her wide-eyed grandson to cook family recipes. The machinist showed a teenager with purple hair the proper way to hold a chef's knife, both of them laughing when she got it right. "Perfect," Michael said softly, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Honest and heartfelt, just like the program itself. No one feels like a charity case here. Everyone's contributing something valuable." He opened his laptop to show Grace his presentation slides, careful not to disturb her neat stacks of recipe cards and budget worksheets. "I've got the numbers here. Meals served, volunteer hours, grocery costs versus restaurant prices for comparable dishes." Each chart was clear and compelling, using simple graphics and minimal text, telling the story of impact without overwhelming detail. Simple enough for anyone to understand, detailed enough to justify continued funding. Across town, Eleanor sat at a corner table in Le Petit Café, a fashionable spot just off the main shopping district. The afternoon sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the marble tabletop. She adjusted her pearl earring as she checked her watch for the third time. Victor Lang slid into the chair across from her, accepting the espresso she'd ordered for him with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's prepared," he said, taking a careful sip and setting the cup down without a sound. His manicured nails tapped once against the saucer. "The timing will be exact, 10 minutes after they announce the mystery donor. Maximum impact, minimum confusion about the source." Eleanor removed a thick, cream-colored envelope from her designer purse, keeping it below table level as she passed it over. Her red nails contrasted sharply against the pale paper. "This concludes our arrangement. I trust you'll delete all related materials afterward." "Every trace, Victor." Victor pocketed the envelope with practiced casualness, his expression betraying nothing as nearby diners chatted over their crème brûlée. "Of course, though I should mention my rates have gone up recently for this type of discretion." "Don't push your luck." Eleanor cut him off, her smile never wavering as she stirred her untouched tea. The silver spoon clinked softly against fine china. "We're finished after tomorrow night. Completely and permanently finished." That evening, Carl sat at his kitchen table, laptop open in front of him. The only light came from the screen and a small lamp in the corner, casting long shadows across his meticulously organized apartment. He'd found a card reader at an electronics store on his way home, telling himself he was just being thorough. If the card contained someone's vacation photos or work documents, he'd make sure they got back to the owner. That's what responsible people did. He inserted the card, clicked through the file directory, and felt his stomach tighten as thumbnails loaded on screen. The first video showed Victor Lang in what looked like a hotel room, practicing how to plant something in a drawer, rehearsing his movements over and over until they appeared casual. Another showed him editing security footage, carefully cropping timestamps and inserting seamless loops to cover gaps. Carl sat back, running a hand over his face, the blue light from the screen highlighting the deep worry lines around his eyes. This wasn't lost family photos. This was evidence. Deliberate, damning evidence of something carefully orchestrated. Moving quickly but methodically, he connected a USB drive and created a clearly labeled folder with today's date. He copied everything, watching the progress bar inch across the screen, then carefully verified each file had transferred completely. The original card went into a small manila envelope, which he sealed with clear packing tape and signed across the flap with his full name and the time. He checked his watch. 9:30 p.m. The gala was tomorrow night. Wealthy donors would be arriving in their finest clothes. People would be donating significant amounts to support the kitchen program, writing checks and making pledges based on Grace's honest work. Revealing this now could derail everything Grace and Michael had built, leaving families hungry and volunteers disillusioned. No, he decided, securing the sealed envelope in his home safe behind the painting of the lighthouse. The combination clicked into place with familiar precision. He would wait until after the gala, then bring everything to Michael. The truth would come out, but not at the cost of feeding hungry families. Carl shut down his laptop and made himself a cup of chamomile tea, his movements precise and controlled like always. Steam curled upward as he added exactly 1 teaspoon of honey. He was good at waiting, good at doing things in the right order. Tomorrow would unfold as it needed to, and then he would do what needed to be done. The evidence wasn't going anywhere, and neither was his determination to see justice served. The grand ballroom at the Heritage Hotel sparkled under crystal chandeliers, their warm glow reflecting off carefully arranged place settings. White roses and sprigs of lavender graced each table, their subtle fragrance mixing with the aroma of fresh-baked bread from the demonstration kitchen set up along one wall. Grace adjusted her simple black dress, a treasured find from a consignment shop, as she watched the donors file in. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened the name cards one final time. This wasn't her world, crystal and silk and multiple forks, but the mission made it worth stepping into it. "There's my girl." Ruthie's voice carried across the foyer. Grace turned to see her grandmother being helped from a sleek town car, Carl holding her arm steady. Ruthie wore her best church dress and a soft blue shawl that brought out her eyes. The car service Michael had arranged meant no bus transfers, no tired legs before the big night. "You look beautiful, Gran," Grace said, embracing her carefully. "And you look like you belong right here," Ruthie whispered back. Michael stepped to the podium as coffee and dessert were being served. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, but his smile was warm and real as he surveyed the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "We're here to celebrate something remarkable, how one anonymous gift sparked a transformation in our community." The lights dimmed slightly as Michael clicked to the first slide. "When this donation arrived at City Harvest Food Bank, dedicated in loving memory of my wife Hannah, it did more than feed people for a day. It showed us what was possible." Grace felt tears prick her eyes as Michael detailed how that initial gift had grown into the kitchen pilot program. Photos showed volunteers chopping vegetables, grandmothers teaching teenagers to knead dough, families sharing meals. But the true miracle wasn't just the money. Michael continued. It was how one person's choice to give selflessly inspired others to give of themselves, and no one exemplifies that spirit more than Grace Dalton. Grace's cheeks warmed as heads turned toward her. Michael's voice grew softer, more personal. Grace took this seed and helped it grow into something beyond what any of us imagined. She saw not just empty stomachs to fill, but dignity to restore. Under her guidance, this isn't charity, it's community. The room burst into applause. People rose to their feet, napkins dabbing at eyes. Ruthie reached over and squeezed Grace's hand, her smile radiant with pride. Pledge cards appeared on tables. Numbers were written, zeros added. The foundation's matching fund tracker on the screen climbed higher and higher. Grace felt light, almost dizzy with joy. This was really happening. Hannah's dream was becoming reality. Families would have full plates and full hearts because people in this room believed in something bigger than themselves. Then phones started buzzing. At first just a few, then more and more. Grace saw frowns appear, heads bent over screens, whispered conversations behind hands. A knot formed in her stomach. Board member Catherine Chen stood up, her face grave. "I apologize, but I need to request an immediate pause in proceedings. Concerning evidence has just come to light regarding security issues with staff. The room erupted in murmurs. Grace's phone vibrated. Someone had sent her the video. Her hands shook as she pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Grace near the jewelry case, looking around furtively. But that wasn't how it happened. The timestamps were wrong. Everything was wrong. Until this can be properly investigated, Catherine continued, all pilot program activities must be suspended. No! The cry came from Ruthie, who half rose from her chair before pressing a hand to her chest. Gran! Grace rushed to her side as Ruthie sank back, breathing heavily. Someone called for medical help. The EMTs arrived quickly, their efficient movements clearing a space around Ruthie's chair. They checked vital signs, asked careful questions, hooked up a portable monitor. Blood pressures elevated but stable, one reported. Heart rhythm shows some irregularity but nothing immediately dangerous. Still, we'd recommend— I'm fine, Ruthie insisted, though her face was pale. Just got myself worked up, that's all. Grace knelt beside her grandmother's chair, still holding her hand. The room had descended into chaos. People gathering in clusters, phones still buzzing, board members huddled with legal counsel. Michael. Grace caught his sleeve as he passed. Can we talk? Privately? They stepped into a quiet hallway, the sounds of confusion muffled behind heavy doors. Grace straightened her shoulders. I need to resign, she said simply. Grace, no, we'll fight this. That video is clearly— The program is what matters. She cut him off gently. Not me, not my reputation. If I stay, this will turn into a circus that hurts everything we've built. The foundation can't afford that. We can't afford to lose you, Michael said softly. Grace managed a small smile. You won't. The work will go on. The recipes are documented, the volunteers are trained, the systems are in place. Promise me you'll keep it alive? Michael nodded, his jaw tight. He reached for her hand, but Grace stepped back, keeping professional distance. Thank you for believing in me, she said. Now please, help me get Ruthie home. Later that night, Grace sat in the dim light of Ruthie's bedroom, watching her grandmother's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep. The EMT's medication had helped calm her heart rate. Tomorrow there would be follow-up appointments to schedule, questions to answer, decisions to make. But for now, Grace simply sat in the quiet, holding on to what really mattered. No video could take away the truth in her heart. No scandal could erase the good that had been done. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same grace that had brought her this far. The clock on Ruthie's nightstand clicked to 11 o'clock. Grace adjusted the blanket over her grandmother's shoulders and whispered a prayer of thanks for another day together. Another chance to choose love over fear, service over self-protection. In the end, that was all anyone could do. The morning after the gala disaster dawned grey and humid. Grace tied on her apron in the Riverside Clinic's industrial kitchen, grateful for the familiar routine of food prep. The stainless steel counters gleamed under fluorescent lights as she lined up carrots, celery, and onions for chopping. Good to have you here, Nurse Alma said warmly, checking her clipboard. We've got 30 meals to prepare today. Grace nodded, focusing on the steady rhythm of her knife against the cutting board. Chop, scrape, pile, repeat. The work was simple and honest, exactly what she needed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket again. Another reporter. She'd turned down 3 interview requests already this morning. The story was spreading. Charity scandal rocks Haynes Foundation. Grace switched her phone to silent without looking at the message. They're vultures, Alma commented, noting Grace's expression. But this too shall pass. In his office across town, Michael sat at his desk, carefully reviewing the statement his PR team had prepared. He made a few adjustments, ensuring the tone remained measured and factual. The Haynes Foundation maintains full confidence in our pilot program's positive impact on community nutrition. We support a thorough and fair investigation into recent allegations, while continuing to honor the program's core mission of serving our neighbors in need. The Foundation thanks all volunteers and donors for their ongoing support during this process. He deliberately avoided mentioning Grace by name, knowing any direct defense might only fuel speculation. But his jaw clenched as he scrolled through social media comments, questioning her character, her motives, her worth. Eleanor sat in her private sitting room, television muted but showing yet another news segment about the scandal. She'd cancelled her morning appointments, citing a migraine. In truth, she couldn't bear the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Her fingers traced the delicate weave of Hannah's favorite scarf, still holding traces of her perfume after all these years. The last time Michael had stopped speaking to her, after Hannah's funeral, when Eleanor's grief came out as criticism, it had taken months to rebuild their relationship. "I can't lose him again," she whispered to the empty room. But the more the story spread, the more she saw judgment in Michael's eyes. She straightened her spine, pushed down the fear. There was no turning back now. In the clinic kitchen, Grace quartered potatoes for the soup, adding them to the simmering stock. The routine was soothing. Measure, season, taste, adjust. No judgment here, just the honest work of feeding people who needed care. "The vegetable soup is always popular," Alma noted, checking temperatures on the cooling racks of fresh-baked bread. "Especially with your herb blend." Grace managed a small smile. At least here, her skills still had value. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from Ruthie reminding her to eat lunch herself. Her grandmother's heart might be fragile, but her spirit remained strong. Across town, Carl Benton sat in his parked sedan, studying the USB drive in his hand. After seeing the chaos at the gala, he'd almost come forward immediately. But years of service had taught him the value of timing and protocol. He picked up his phone and composed a careful text to Michael. "Request private meeting tomorrow afternoon regarding security footage. Confidential matter." Michael's response came quickly. "My office, 2 p.m. In the Foundation's main conference room, the board's emergency session stretched into its third hour. Michael maintained his professional demeanor as they debated next steps, but his patience wore thin at suggestions to distance the Foundation from Grace entirely. "The pilot program's results speak for themselves," he stated firmly. "Over 500 meals served, 300 volunteers trained, 15 community partnerships established. Those numbers matter more than speculation." Back in the clinic kitchen, Grace wiped down counters as the afternoon light faded. The soup had been portioned into containers, the bread sliced and wrapped, tomorrow's prep list written in her neat hand on the whiteboard. Simple tasks, completed with care. "You're good at this," Alma observed, signing off on the day's temperature logs. "Making sure people are fed, body and soul." Grace rinsed her cleaning cloth, wrung it out carefully. "It's what I know how to do." Her phone showed more missed calls, another interview request, a supportive message from Pastor Joel. She cleared the notifications without reading them. The truth would come out or it wouldn't. Her job was to keep showing up, keep serving, keep believing in something bigger than herself. The industrial dishwasher hummed its final cycle as 8 o'clock approached. Grace dried the last of the prep bowls, checked that pilot lights were off. Lights dimmed. Tomorrow would bring more vegetables to chop, more meals to prepare, more moments to choose grace over bitterness. She hung up her apron, signed out on Alma's clipboard, and gathered her bag. Another day done. Not the life she'd imagined a week ago, but honest work all the same. Sometimes that had to be enough. Carl Benton's knuckles rapped softly on Michael's office door at precisely 2 o'clock. Michael waved him in, immediately noticing the driver's usually calm demeanor seemed more serious than usual. There was a tightness around Carl's eyes that Michael had rarely seen during their years working together. "Thank you for meeting me, sir," Carl said, closing the door behind him with deliberate care, checking to ensure the latch caught. He pulled a small USB drive from his jacket pocket, holding it as if it contained something precious and dangerous at once. "I found something you need to see." Michael gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down." Carl settled into the leather chair, his posture perfectly straight as he leaned forward to plug the drive into Michael's computer. His movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, as he navigated through the folders and pulled up the first video file. This was recorded in the mansion's garage 3 nights before the bracelet incident. I've been reviewing security footage as part of standard protocol. The security footage flickered to life on Michael's monitor, showing Victor Lang moving purposefully through the spacious garage, practicing different walking patterns near Eleanor's parking spot. The light from the overhead fixtures cast long shadows as Victor held up the bracelet case, testing various angles and sight lines. He moved with the calculated precision of someone rehearsing a performance, checking camera positions and timing his movements. Michael leaned forward, his expression darkening as he watched Victor rehearse what was clearly a staged theft. The evidence was unmistakable: the deliberate movements, the careful planning. A cold sensation settled in Michael's stomach. "There's more," Carl said quietly, his finger hovering over the mouse before opening another file. The second clip showed Eleanor alone in the garage the night before the scheme. The timestamp in the corner read 11:47 p.m. She stood in her designated parking spot, her elegant figure illuminated by security lights, clutching Hannah's pale blue scarf to her chest like a talisman. Her whispered words were clear in the garage's perfect acoustics, captured by the hidden microphone. "I can't lose him again." Her voice broke on the last word, revealing a vulnerability that Michael rarely witnessed in his composed mother. Michael's hands gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, his chest tightening with each passing second of footage. The implications were devastating. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Found a micro SD card near Mrs. Haynes's parking spot when I was checking tire pressure on the vehicles." Carl explained, his tone matter-of-fact but respectful. "Made a copy before anyone could destroy the evidence. I've kept everything secure. Victor must have dropped it while switching out dash cam cards. The original card contains both videos plus some other footage he was likely planning to edit." Michael nodded slowly, processing the weight of what he'd just witnessed. The betrayal stung, but the revelation of his mother's fear, that raw emotion, complicated his anger. "You did the right thing, Carl, but we need to protect the original." He pulled a notepad close, writing down an address and account details with a steady hand despite his internal turmoil. "First City Credit Union, Box 713. Place the micro SD there and bring me the deposit receipt. We'll need chain of custody if this goes legal." "Yes, sir. Right away." Carl stood, understanding the gravity of his role. His normally impassive face showed a flicker of relief, as if a burden had been partially lifted by sharing the truth. "And Carl," Michael added as the driver reached the door, his hand resting on the polished brass handle. "Thank you for doing the right thing, even when it was difficult." After Carl left, Michael sat alone in his office for a long while, the afternoon sun gradually shifting across the hardwood floor as he studied still frames from the footage. He zoomed in on his mother's face, seeing fear he hadn't witnessed since Hannah's death. The pain there was real, even if her actions were wrong. Her fingers had clutched that scarf, Hannah's favorite, so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The contradiction troubled him deeply. Genuine love expressed through destructive deception. At 7 o'clock that evening, Michael knocked softly on Eleanor's sitting room door, his heart heavy with what needed to be done. She called for him to enter, then stiffened visibly when she saw his expression, her reading glasses slipping down her nose as she looked up from her tablet. "We need to talk, Mother," he said gently, sitting across from her in the pale blue armchair that had been his father's favorite. He placed several printed screenshots on the coffee table between them, arranging them neatly, giving her time to recognize what they contained. "I'd like to hear your side first." Eleanor's face drained of color as she recognized the garage footage, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her throat in an instinctive gesture of distress. Her eyes darted between the images and her son's face, searching for judgment. Her hands trembled as she reached for Hannah's scarf, draped across the chair back where she kept it close. Always. "I was so afraid," she whispered, her voice unusually fragile in the quiet room. "After Hannah died, you withdrew completely. You were like a ghost in this house. I thought I'd lost you forever." She twisted the scarf in her fingers, the delicate fabric wrinkling under her anxious touch. "When I saw you with Grace, saw how she made you smile again, I panicked. I couldn't bear the thought of you disappearing into grief again if she hurt you, or if she was just using you for your position. So you hired Victor to frame her?" Michael's voice held more sorrow than anger, the question hanging between them like a weight. Eleanor's carefully maintained composure cracked, her shoulders sagging as decades of perfect posture gave way to grief. "Yes," she sobbed, tears spilling onto her silk blouse. "I told myself she was beneath you, that she was after your money. But that was just my prejudice talking, my fear." She looked up at her son through tears, mascara creating delicate trails down her cheeks. "I was wrong, so terribly wrong." Michael moved to sit beside her on the small sofa, taking her hands in his, feeling the fine bones beneath the skin. "You hurt an innocent person, Mother. Someone who turned your bribe money into blessing for others, who's been nothing but gracious even under attack, who cooks for strangers while carrying the weight of what you did to her." "I know," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with regret. "I've watched her all week at that clinic, still serving others while I destroyed her reputation. The way she lifts those children up, how she treats the volunteers with such respect. She's a better person than I am." "Then help me make this right," Michael said firmly, squeezing her hands. "A public apology, full disclosure. Show everyone what real accountability looks like. No PR spin, no damage control, just truth." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, wiped her eyes with the edge of Hannah's scarf before carefully folding it and placing it on her lap. "Yes, whatever it takes. I'll call Victor too, make him return his payment, admit his part. He can't refuse if I come forward first." They spent the next hour drafting statements and scheduling press calls for Saturday morning. Eleanor insisted on taking full responsibility, refusing to let Victor's role minimize her own accountability. She wrote and rewrote her statement, sometimes stopping to dab at fresh tears, but never wavering in her commitment to complete honesty. As 9:30 approached, Michael stood to leave, looking down at his mother. Somehow smaller now, but paradoxically stronger in her vulnerability. "I love you, Mother. That hasn't changed. But love means telling hard truths sometimes." Eleanor nodded, still clutching Hannah's scarf like an anchor to what mattered most. "I understand now. Grace has that same kind of love, the kind that tells truth and serves others, no matter the cost." She managed a wavering smile, hope flickering beneath the sorrow. Perhaps she could teach me." Michael squeezed her shoulder gently before heading to his study to finish the press notifications. The corridor seemed longer tonight, the weight of the day's revelations slowing his steps. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: questions from reporters, public scrutiny, the painful process of rebuilding trust. But tonight, truth had won a quiet victory in their home. Sometimes that was enough to start healing. Sometimes acknowledging the wound was the first step toward making it whole again. The autumn morning brought a crisp breeze as reporters gathered on the mansion's front steps. At precisely 10 o'clock, Eleanor Haynes emerged, wearing a simple navy dress without her usual statement jewelry. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the microphone, but her voice rang clear. "I stand before you today to confess and take full responsibility for a grievous wrong," she began. "I orchestrated a scheme to frame Grace Dalton, a valued employee, for theft of my vintage bracelet. I hired Victor Lang to plant evidence and create misleading security footage." Cameras clicked rapidly as Eleanor continued. "My actions were born of prejudice and fear. I attempted to bribe Miss Dalton to leave her position, but she transformed that money into an anonymous gift to feed hungry families. While I was plotting against her, she was serving others." From her position at the edge of the crowd, Grace watched quietly, one hand resting on Ruthie's shoulder. Michael stood nearby, his presence steady and supportive. "Mr. Lang, through his legal counsel, has agreed to fully cooperate with authorities and accept the prosecutor's recommendation of community service," Eleanor announced. She reached into a folder, removing an official-looking document. "I am presenting a cashier's check for the full appraised value of the bracelet to the Foundation as initial restitution. Furthermore, I will auction the bracelet itself, with all proceeds going to a new initiative." Eleanor's voice grew stronger as she outlined her plan. "Today, I am establishing the Open Table Fund. This endowment will create culinary job training and placement programs for overlooked workers, including those who face size discrimination or employment gaps. It will provide scholarships and support neighborhood food security through block fridge grants." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Eleanor turned to face Grace directly. "To Miss Dalton, the Foundation staff, our devoted donors, and the entire city, I ask for your forgiveness. My actions were inexcusable, but I hope to demonstrate genuine change through sustained action." The Foundation Board President stepped forward, announcing the pilot program's immediate reinstatement with doubled matching funds. Within minutes, donors began calling out renewed pledges, many citing Eleanor's display of humility as their motivation. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor approached Grace and Ruthie. "Ms. Dalton, might I have a word in private?" Grace nodded, giving Ruthie's hand a reassuring squeeze before following Eleanor to a quiet corner of the garden. "I have one more request," Eleanor said softly. "Would you consider chairing the Open Table Fund? Your expertise in both kitchen operations and compassionate leadership is exactly what we need." Grace studied Eleanor's face, seeing genuine remorse in her eyes. "I'll agree on one condition," she replied. "The fund must honor both Hannah Haynes and Ruthie Dalton by name. Hannah's vision for feeding families, and Ruthie's lifetime of stretching resources to help others. Those are the examples we should follow." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Hannah would have loved that, and your grandmother deserves every recognition." They shook hands firmly, the simple gesture sealing both a partnership and the beginning of healing. Throughout the afternoon, Grace fielded calls from community leaders and culinary schools eager to participate. Michael helped her set up a temporary office in the mansion's sunroom, where she could work while staying close to Ruthie, who dozed peacefully in a comfortable armchair. As evening approached, Grace gathered her materials and headed home. At her kitchen table, surrounded by familiar sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, Ruthie's gospel music playing softly, she began drafting the grant criteria for the Open Table Fund. Her pencil moved steadily across the paper as she outlined requirements: priority given to neighborhood-based initiatives, minimum 60% of funds directly supporting food costs, required nutrition education component. She smiled as she added, all programs must include dignity-focused service training. The kitchen clock showed 8 o'clock when Grace paused to make Ruthie's evening tea. The grant criteria were taking shape, transforming pain into purpose, just as she'd done with Eleanor's envelope that first night. She thought of Hannah's dream, and Ruthie's wisdom, grateful their names would guide this work forward. Ruthie's voice carried from the living room, humming along with the radio. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Grace smiled, adding one final note to her draft. Success measured in lives touched, not just meals served. The September sun cast a gentle warmth over Maple Street as volunteers hung bright streamers across the freshly painted community kitchen entrance. The aroma of simmering soup and fresh-baked bread drifted through open windows, drawing neighbors from their homes. Carl pulled up in his sedan, helping Ruthie step out carefully. Her turquoise shawl sparkled in the sunlight as she made her way to the front row of chairs, where Michael had arranged comfortable seating with extra cushions. Miss Ruthie, you're looking well, Pastor Joel said, reaching out to steady her arm. He adjusted his collar in the warm breeze, smiling at the growing crowd. Inside the kitchen, Grace and Eleanor worked side by side, their aprons dusted with flour. Eleanor had chosen a simple cotton one, plain and practical, worlds away from her designer wardrobe. The carrots need another minute, Grace said, testing a piece from the soup pot. Eleanor nodded, arranging ladles on the serving counter. The bread's perfect, though, just like you taught me. Through the window, they could see Carl walking toward a parked police car, manila envelope in hand. He spoke briefly with the city investigator, handing over both the original dash-cam card and his written statement. The investigator nodded, logging the evidence carefully. That's the last piece, Eleanor murmured, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The security guard came forward yesterday. Victor's cooperation agreement is already on record. Grace squeezed her shoulder gently. Then it's truly finished. Time to focus on feeding our neighbors. The choir gathered near the entrance, their robes catching the breeze. Pastor Joel stepped forward, raising his hands for attention. Friends and neighbors, he began, we gather to celebrate not just a renovated building, but a renewed spirit of community. Let us pray. He bowed his head. Lord, bless this kitchen and those who serve here. May every meal prepared remind us that your table has room for all. Amen. The choir's voices rose in perfect harmony. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Michael finished setting out the last row of chairs, making sure there was easy access for elderly veterans and space for parents with strollers. Children darted between the seats, their laughter mixing with the hymn. As the song ended, Grace and Eleanor began serving soup, working in smooth coordination. Bowl after bowl passed from their hands to hungry neighbors. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with unshed tears as she watched a young mother settle her children at the table. Remember to try the cornbread, Grace called out warmly to each guest. Miss Ruthie's recipe. The afternoon flowed like a gentle stream. Michael moved between tables, stopping to chat with veterans about their service years and helping kids reach the water pitchers. At the dessert table, Ruthie supervised the distribution of apple cobbler, her joy evident in every smile. Near the recipe card station, Grace paused to reorganize the printed instructions. Michael joined her, their hands meeting over a stack of cards, their fingers entwined naturally, neither pulling away despite the public setting. No words were needed. The quiet moment spoke volumes about patience and trust rebuilt. The diabetic-friendly versions are very popular, Grace noted, indicating a nearly empty card holder. Just like you predicted, Michael replied softly, his thumb tracing small circles on her hand. As twilight approached, strings of lights flickered on overhead, casting a warm glow over the block-long table. Families lingered, sharing stories and second helpings. Children played tag in the growing dusk while their parents chatted over coffee. Eleanor finished wiping down the serving counter and made her way to where Grace stood reviewing the next day's prep list. "May I have a moment?" They stepped slightly aside, the fairy lights twinkling above them. Eleanor took Grace's hands in hers, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for teaching me how to love my own child," she whispered. "I was so afraid of losing him that I nearly destroyed everything. You showed me a better way." Grace's eyes softened. "Love multiplies when we share it," she said simply. The street hummed with conversation and laughter as volunteers began packing leftover bread for morning deliveries. On the community bulletin board, the Open Table Fund calendar displayed a full quarter of upcoming events: cooking classes, nutrition workshops, and pilot kitchen rotations across the city. Carl helped Ruthie to her feet, carefully wrapping her shawl against the evening air. She paused to admire the scene. Eleanor teaching a teenager how to properly wrap bread, Michael and Grace sorting recipe cards, neighbors helping neighbors clear tables. The final stragglers gathered their belongings as 8:30 approached. The block-long table stood as a testament to what they'd built together. Not just a meal service, but a family bound by something stronger than blood. The choice to serve others first, together. Pastor Joel's voice carried across the cleanup activity. "Same time next week, everyone. Don't forget to sign up for your rotation slots." Grace took one last look at the quarterly calendar, noting with satisfaction how naturally their new rhythm had developed. Each person had found their place in this expanding circle of care. Eleanor's business sense now directed toward genuine service, Michael's resources matched with heart, and her own expertise multiplied through teaching others. The kitchen lights dimmed except for the prep area, where tomorrow's bread would rise overnight. Outside, the street lights illuminated faces of contentment as the community dispersed, carrying with them more than just leftover cornbread. They carried the certainty of belonging.